Your toxic masculinity is making me feel very unsafe. Oh, there we go. Whoa, look at that. Oh.
Well, a warm welcome to you all. In this video, we talk about the New York Times article all about men who eat meat. I'm JJ, I'm a life coach, and I eat mostly meat, and that's helped me get rid of my granny panties.
Oh, I'm Eric, I'm a novelist. I eat mostly meat. Well, this article came out April 30th, 2024. We have printed out copies because we're going to get into it.
Getting in.
And they interviewed Dr. Baker, and he had actually kind of previewed that the interview had happened and he didn't know how the article was going to turn out. And one of the first reactions I have is, I don't really understand why they did an article about men who eat meat. Can only men eat meat?
So my first experience with the carnivore diet was through Dr. Barry and Nisha.
Oh, those are two notable men in the field.
Yes, Nisha with her beautiful hair. So my first introduction was not solely from the male perspective. And I follow a lot of carnivore women.
Yeah, well, one of the first ones that I really started following was Amanda from Carnivorous Me.
That's right, yes, Amanda. Oh gosh, I watch Kelly Hogan regularly, and Bella Steak and Butter Gal.
Oh, sure.
I'm in her community. Right. Oh, yeah.
I'm bad at memory.
I cannot remember her name, but 5 Minute Body, awesome, love her.
I've seen those videos.
Yeah, lots of women that I follow, including Nia, also, just a lot.
This article by Stephen Kurtz came out of the New York Times, and it actually starts with the sentence, "Girl dinner, this is not." And you had to look up girl dinner.
I did.
We never heard of that phrase.
Let me say I am not on TikTok or Instagram, and I guess that's where a lot of this comes from. Mm-hmm. So I did some research, and it seems that girl dinner is like putting a bunch of snacks on a plate and calling it dinner. Low effort.
But what makes it girl dinner?
I don't know.
It's just girls do that? I
don't know. Maybe men don't. Is that true?
I don't know. It sounds like just the way teenagers eat.
Yeah, it does. Teenage dinner is more like it.
I didn't know it had a name all these years.
I didn't either, but I found this article before bed, and so obviously it was carnivore, so I wanted to read it, and that got me right away. It was like, wait a minute, girl dinner? The author says the social media genre is quarterbacked largely by muscular fellows who claim that a meat-heavy diet is the key to mental and physical well-being. And I just thought it was interesting that they focused on men, first of all, but quarterbacked largely by muscular fellows, and didn't say anything about all of the I feel like the doctors are the ones who are quarterbacking this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and some of them are heavily muscled, like Dr. Baker and Dr. Chafee, but there's also Dr. Barry, Dr. Ovadia, Dr. Kiltz, Dr. Hampton, and women like Dr. Eid and Dr. Bright and Dr. Wiedemann. So I really feel like focusing on the heavily muscled men only misses the point. And I get taking an angle. I just think this really minimized a lot, including the health benefits. If you go on, he says that these men boast about not having consumed a vegetable in months. They also claim health benefits, including drastic weight loss and sharpened mental acuity. And that's all that they mention, really, for the claims of health benefits. So they completely skip over any metabolic health, type 2 diabetes, mental health issues. Like, they're really keeping it mental acuity and weight loss.
Right.
And muscle building.
In response to this, he interviewed a assistant professor of nutrition and dietetics, St. Louis University in Missouri. It's pronounced Missouri in my family.
Who are from Missouri.
They were from Joplin, MO. Whitney Linsenmeyer, this professor, says, it really bucks nutrition science, but the lack of endorsement from the medical establishment may add to its appeal. I thought that was an interesting thing to include there. There is no evidence anywhere else in the article to support that assertion by this author. And then he talks about how Joe Rogan and Lex Friedman are podcasters who are influential figures in a testosterone-fueled segment of the media, often called the manosphere. I've never once heard that term.
Oh.
Have you heard the manosphere?
I have not, but I am not on social media as much as you are.
Well, you're not in the manosphere, too.
I'm clearly not in the manosphere.
I don't know how I got excluded. Maybe it's because I don't need to call it a manosphere to be in it. Wherever I am is a manosphere.
This was interesting, too, because then they go into talking about Jordan Peterson, who they say, psychologist, author, and fellow podcast host Jordan Peterson, also a carnivore, who credited the diet with having healed his chronic psoriasis and gum disease. Are those the big things that Jordan Peterson talks about, are his psoriasis and his gum disease?
Well, I've heard him talk about the carnivore diet many times, and I don't remember those specific things, but his list was much longer than that, including huge mental health benefits.
Huge.
Being able to sleep and wake up feeling normal and not wanting to die.
But what about psoriasis?
Yeah. It does give it short shrift, but my feeling was he mentioned Jordan Peterson only to try to taint carnivore with the controversy surrounding that guy. Whatever you think about him and he's used carnivore to great effect in his health, as has his daughter, who actually got him into it. So from a standpoint of this being a masculine thing to do, Jordan was convinced to do it by his young daughter.
Who is not in the manosphere.
Maybe she's an honorary member of the manosphere.
You talked about minimizing, we sort of suggested minimizing Jordan Peterson and having that sort of cognitive dissonance that might come from some of his controversial things. But then they go into actually talking to Dr. Baker, who coined the phrase carnivore diet back in his book in, 2018? Yeah, 2018 book. And I think they treated him pretty well, although they did call him the buff orthopedic surgeon.
Yeah, that's true.
It is true. It is true.
I don't know why it matters that he's buff, but he is.
Yeah.
And he went on the Rogan show. That was like 7 years ago, the first time he appeared on it. And the article goes to say that it was his appearance on Rogan that really exploded the awareness of the carnivore diet in the broader public's mind. There's a quote in here from somewhere in Joe Rogan talking about when he did it. The best I ever felt, like literally, the best I've ever felt throughout the day was when I was on the carnivore diet. Then he mentions the Liver King, who I don't really know much about. I've seen some pictures of this guy, but there's very clear to talk about him admitting to have used steroids.
So that's, again, where I just think the author is inserting a little bit of negative... Association.
Yeah.
That's the good way of putting it. Yeah.
But I didn't know the Liver King was a carnivore. So I guess I wasn't
I don't follow.
Tuned into that.
Yeah.
And then there's another quote from the professor of nutrition, Linsenmeyer. A plant-free, low-fiber diet goes against the accepted views, true, of what constitutes healthy, balanced eating, Professor Linsenmeyer said. Meat and butter are very high in saturated fat, she said. That's true. That increases the risk for cardiovascular disease. That's false. If this were my patient following this diet, I would be very concerned. So it's interesting we got two truths and a false in there. Nor, I don't really understand why a professor would appeal to accepted views rather than science. But accepted views is the term that this person chose to use. Mm-hmm. And then, because of the nature of the New York Times, they have to put this in there. There is also a matter of contributing to the warming climate, since meat and dairy production are linked to emissions of methane, which is true because it's directly linked because cows emit methane, a potent greenhouse gas. It's kind of weird phrasing. Meat and dairy production are linked to emissions of methane. I would say that the editor probably needed to get on this person's case and say, no, they're directly causing a release of methane, but so are my dogs. And my dad, when he was alive,
mine too,
was the worst. My dad was a WMD. And he was not shy about it.
He was not shy.
Yeah.
I can say that. Now, this gets interesting to me because then the article starts to talk about ancestral eating, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
And says that promoters of the carnivore diet argue that our ancestors subsisted on animals almost exclusively. Mm-hmm. Almost.
Yeah.
That's what I hear too. Yeah. They go on to say that carnivorism, in their view, represents a return to a supposed hunter-gatherer golden age, long before the advent of Captain Crunch, et cetera, and other highly processed foodstuffs. Mm-hmm. That is true.
I just think it's funny that they use supposed. A supposed hunter-gatherer golden age.
Yeah.
Do we doubt that there was a hunter-gathering age prior to agriculture? Unless it's the golden that he's concerned about, the hunter-gatherer golden age.
Oh, supposed golden age.
Yeah, I think that's what he's trying to say.
If you listen to carnivore people, they're really talking not about a golden age, but about the proper human diet. It's not that they are idealizing this. It's that they're saying that, hello, our bodies were literally designed to eat this way, almost exclusively meat.
Yeah.
And if you are, I like to use the word deranged. If you have mental derangement, hormonal derangement, intestinal derangement, metabolic derangement, whatever it might be, then it's a good idea to eliminate the other, stick to meat for a while.
And it wasn't a golden age long before Captain Crunch. It was a golden age long before cultivated wheat and rice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why am I getting angry?
I don't know, because I'm starting to ramp up. It just...
Michelle's listening to this while she's walking, and she's going to start laughing if I go off.
The article then goes into Paul Saladino, and they talk about him and his book, Carnivore Code, but then in parentheses, has since reintroduced carbohydrates into his diet with fruit and honey. Mm-hmm. Now, I know that this can be a controversial thing among the carnivore spectrum, yet the quote they use says, forget the leaves and fibrous tubers. He's still forgetting the leaves and fibrous tubers because fruit does not contain all the anti-nutrients of vegetables. This sort of ignores that. That's fine. That's a subtlety. But again, I think they're trying to create that negative association. He said to just stick to hunting, and then he's now eating fruit and honey.
When you talk about Dr. Saladino, you can never forget to mention he surfs 3 to 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
So you can have 300 grams of honey if you do that.
I don't do that.
I've never once surfed in my life.
No, me neither.
I don't
Here in Wisconsin.
Yeah, Wisconsin. I don't want to get eaten by a shark. I have a really irrational fear of sharks. And if every last shark were just croaked off all of a sudden, I'd probably be nearly as happy as if every mosquito had. And I mean, what shark is threatening me right now? I just don't like the idea of them. And I don't even want to eat them.
That was my next question.
It makes me double evil. I want to get rid of them and not use their corpse.
Oh, so then the New Yorker is trying to do its due diligence and talk about some science around animal studies. Biologists David Raubenheimer and Stephen Simpson, who found that protein-loaded diets had a detrimental effect on animals' lifespans. Quote, our sexy lean mice who ate high-protein, low-carb diets were the shortest-lived of all, wrote the scientists in 2014. They made great-looking middle-aged corpses. This is not the proper mouse diet. Yeah, well, that's all I have to say.
The way they do a mouse study that's going to have high protein, they're not giving it a beefsteak. They're just giving it a formulated mouse chow that has high protein in it in order to do this study. So what protein is in mouse chow? I don't know.
I don't know either.
Soybeans or something?
Oh, that could be.
But also, yeah, we know that mice aren't people. That's why after they do drug development in mice, they actually have to go up the evolutionary chain and eventually get into humans. And a study. Do you know how many mice studies there have been done in the past year? Thousands upon thousands upon thousands. And so a study where they fed mice something that they wouldn't naturally eat and they died younger, that does not translate into what humans should do. And it should never have been mentioned by a scientist, nor should it have been put in to the New York Times.
A 2014 study, by the way.
Yeah, well, it could have been an 1814 study, and I would have still felt the same way.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious about what they say about the Neanderthals, because studies of Neanderthals have turned up evidence that their diets included dates, tubers, and other leafy foods in addition to meat. I'm not shocked by this.
No.
And they go to say that humans are opportunistic omnivores who will, quote, eat whatever is available, which is almost always a mix of plants and animals and honey. No, I have no problem with that whatsoever.
No problem at all. But yet they're saying, I feel like he's putting this in opposition to the carnivore diet.
Yeah, because they don't say what proportion of dates, tubers, and other leafy foods they had to meat.
Yeah.
Was it 10% of their diet? Was it 70% of their diet? I don't think it was probably 70.
Probably not, especially if those poor Neanderthals lived here in Wisconsin.
Well, they weren't living here in Wisconsin. They were living in Northern Europe, and they were eating megafauna that they beat over the head with a mallet. Not a mallet, a club.
And some fruit. I mean, some
in season,
vegetation in season.
When you could get it and you could find it, but, they survived winters and they ate bears.
Yeah.
Cave bears.
Bears.
You read Clan of the Cave Bear.
I did.
Was that any good?
Oh, wow. It was good at the time, but then I went back to read it in more recent history.
Do you remember that I was always asking my mom if she'd finished Clan of the Cave Bear or the Mammoth Hunters? For at least 2 decades, she would talk about, I'm reading this book. I'm like, are you still reading the Mammoth Hunters? Because it took her forever to read it the first time. Yeah, they're super thick books, too. I never read those.
Yeah, I don't feel like they quite held up, but maybe in light of my newer year and a half carnivore eating.
Maybe you should get back into it.
Maybe I should. Yeah.
I know we watched a movie of the Clan of the Cave Bear. Carol Hannah in that?
I feel like she was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember anything else about it.
Yeah.
But anyway, the Neanderthals surely, like all humans, ate opportunistically of plants that they needed to in order to survive. But the idea that it wasn't mostly meat doesn't make any logical sense.
No, it doesn't.
And there's a whole area of research on this, and I wish I could remember the guy who did a presentation about it. It's on YouTube. I'll put it on the screen. But he showed how they do carbon isotope analysis to show that there's a concentration of this particular isotope in carnivores at higher and higher levels. So the higher up the food chain you are, the more of it is concentrated in the remains. And so they can look at the remains of various pre-human hominins and humans and see that the ruminant animals had the least amount because they're deriving it from the grass. But then the animals that ate the ruminants had more of it, and then the animals that ate it had more. So humans were like eating tigers and other carnivores as well because they could, because they had sharp weapons, they worked in teams, and they controlled fire. But those were only the men.
Those poor women.
They did not eat the meat.
Those poor women. They didn't get the meat.
No, they could only forage tubers and leafy greens and the occasional berry. And otherwise, whatever the men happened to have left over that the dogs didn't get, then the women could have some nibbles off of those bones. Because clearly, from this article, you know that it's really men who are eating the meat.
Well, and for me too, I am a woman, in case you didn't notice, and I don't love that this takes this slant and leaves out the women. I get that they made an angle, yet I feel like women really do need carnivore diet quite a bit because, number one, we're nurturing other human beings within our bodies. Because of our complex hormone system, we really do need that fat, that animal fat, even more than men, some say.
Yeah.
So excluding the women from the carnivore movement and making it sound like it's a purely male thing, it does a disservice to a woman because of the health benefits of carnivore. Not just the, man versus woman thing, but actual health benefits.
So then they go to talk about, well, do people who live long lives eat this way? And they talk to Dan Buettner, the author who identified 5 reasons around the world where people have especially long lifespans. And they eat predominantly whole food, plant-based meals, among other practices. Wine consumption, they don't mention that here. And he says, I know of no long-lived culture in the history of the world that were mainly meat eaters. And to that I say, it's amazing that this guy knows all of the cultures in the history of the world. That is an enormous amount of knowledge to go back prehistory and even know everything that those cultures ate.
Well, and they've found...
And how long they lived.
Yeah. And they found more recently that the blue zone idea, the concept, is not based on good scientific practices. And it also has a lot of bad data because people don't actually have birth certificates from them. So they kind of...
I remember when that book came out, the Blue Zone thing, and I was like, oh, this is bad news for me because I don't do any of these things. This is an interesting paragraph. For some, going carnivore appears to be a facet of the optimization culture that seeks self-improvement through so-called biohacking and other methods. I understand what he's getting at, the optimization culture thing, but I think that for as long as humans have been around, they try to optimize their health by trying things. For others, there may be an aspect of flexing one's masculinity and success through the consumption of beefsteak, a luxury in much of the world. Flexing one's masculinity.
Yeah, I didn't realize... I have beef every day, and I never thought I was flexing my masculinity by eating it.
Well, you don't have to flex your masculinity.
Oh, no.
No, because masculinity flexes itself.
Wait, am I gonna pop out into flexing my masculinity?
No.
No.
You don't get meat anymore, this says.
Whoa.
That's a total misrepresentation of what this says, but it's funny.
Yeah, it is. Well, and I want to point out the carnivores who talk about carnivore on a budget. And Dr. Berry, especially, when I first started following him back in 2022, early 2023, he was really speaking a lot to truck drivers specifically and how they could eat at convenience stores and so forth while they were on the road. And I think this is a really important message, is that it doesn't have to be expensive. And the other message we hear from carnivores, and that I think we've experienced as well, is that we don't see an increase in our food budget because we're not eating as much. We're not throwing away as much waste. We're not stopping at Starbucks to get the lattes and the convenience store, usually to get the convenience store sandwich. So this is putting that elitism into it as well.
Yeah. And actually, I've gone to eating mostly ground beef these days.
Yeah.
I think the last paragraph, this author redeems himself a little bit.
Well, the last few paragraphs actually go into something that feels a little more agreeable. It says that people have embraced a way of eating referred to as crazy and radical, even by its evangelists, may say something about the Western diet of processed foods and its effect on the populace. The Western diet of processed foods, I think most people can agree on, who are trying to optimize their health, whether they're vegans or carnivores or somewhere in between. But I love how it says its effect on the populace, because it didn't even get into its effects on the populace, which we've experienced. Yeah. So it says, on this point, at least Mr. Buettner can agree with the carnivores. Quote, we live in an environment where 95 out of 100 food decisions presented to us are bad, he said. So in desperation, to turn to an extreme diet, I don't blame any overweight and unhealthy American. And I'm with Joe Rogan. When I eat carnivore, I feel the best I have ever felt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're going to keep doing it?
I plan to keep on doing it.
Even though it's toxically masculine to do so?
Even though I'm just a girl, little old me.
Yeah. Your toxic masculinity is making me feel very unsafe.
Oh, no. Well, let me pull out.
There we go. Whoa! Look at that.
Oh!
You were picking up huge limbs yesterday.
Yes.
We pruned this giant Norwegian spruce tree, and there were some big limbs.
There were.
And I was cutting them off the tree, and she was loading them onto the trailer. Mm-hmm. And then we unloaded them off the trailer. You got some good work out there.
I did. And I wouldn't have been able to do that in the past. It would have left me flat on my back for several days afterward. And, of course, we actually grilled out while we were there.
Yeah, we did, yeah.
And you had...
I had hamburger patties on the Weber cooker grill. And I don't like Weber. I don't like charcoal grilled food. I don't like the flavor that charcoal imparts to it. But I ate it.
Yeah. And I had a steak.
But it was actually nice to cook out and have a very easy way to make food that was on plan. That's very portable.
Yeah, no DoorDash for us.
We're going to stay strong eating carnivore, and we hope that you do too.
Bye.